My name is Neil Carter, and you're listening to the Godless and Dixie podcast. For more thoughts about the challenges facing a former evangelical still living in a highly religious environment, visit godlessanddixie.com. Why We Make Gods, a message delivered to the Unitarian Church of Ellisville, Mississippi on September 8th, 2019.
We make gods. And I could make a joke about an atheist losing his way on the trip to the church.
Oh yeah, that would actually be pretty good. It was the devil did it. Okay, this is a really big topic. Why do we make gods? And one of the things that I could have called it is, why do we keep on making gods? It's a very broad topic, and somebody told me one time that talking to me is a bit like talking to one of those Russian dolls, the Troika dolls, where when you open up one, there's another one inside, then you open up another, there's another inside, and that's what conversation with me is like, is I start one, and then I go off a trail, and then another trail, and then another trail. But eventually, I make my way back to the original. So if you'll be patient with me, if I seem very scattered, I promise it's all going to tie back together again when I'm done. But these are really big questions and big topics. So I am an atheist, that's correct, but I really don't use that word much to define myself as much as some others do, because I think there are bigger questions than just, are there gods or are there not gods? In fact, what are gods? You know, we're going to have to define what we mean by gods. And I think there's a broader definition of what a god is that will encompass things that you find yourself thinking, well, okay, I might even believe in that. I'm not sure, even as an atheist. So I grew up religious. I grew up Southern Baptist, and I didn't really lose my religion or change my mind about faith until I was about 35. And that was enough time for me to have become solidified in a life path with a family and friends and a network of support. And when I left my faith, I lost all of that. So it's been a difficult journey for me. But the more that I've kind of worked out my life after religion, the more I've realized that there are elements of my past that are really not as bad as I thought they were. And my mind has sort of broadened to a lot of the questions that we're even asking in the first place. I spent a couple of years going to conferences that are specially designed for non-theists. They're atheists. It's an atheist conference. And I got to tell you, it's hard to build community around not believing something. I understand it, and people say, why would you even call yourself an atheist? What, do you not call yourself a non-stamp collector? And that's clever, but the thing is, if everyone in the world, or everyone in your world, cared so much about stamp collecting that they judged your character based on whether or not you had a good collection, and if you told them later that you don't even really care for stamps, they'd be shocked. And you might start identifying yourself as a non-stamp collector, because it would be one of the only ways you could identify yourself. It would be the way that you would help figure out who is like you and differentiate between yourself and everyone else, which is kind of the part of growing into who you are. All right, so there's a lot of different ways we can label ourselves. But I go to these conferences, and I realize that because so many of them are reacting to religion as if it's the main thing, that the main enemy to be dealt with, I don't think they realize that some of the things they hate about religion, they do too. We leave things and then just recreate what we left because we carry it with us. There are elements to ourselves that we can't escape. So the question is, why do we make gods? And I'm going to try to do this in as short a time as I can. Do you like Lady and the Tramp? Have you ever seen the movie Lady and the Tramp? Disney classic. Okay, I love this movie because when I was younger, my little sister watched it constantly. And we must have watched that thing 2 or 3 times a week. Had the whole thing memorized. Then later when I had my own children, we loved watching it too. So this is a movie that's very near and dear to my heart for sentimental reasons. They're redoing it. They're now doing a live action version of Lady and the Tramp. And they just did that to The Lion King. All right? Do y'all go to movies? Okay. Do you bring grandkids to movies? You might have gone to The Lion King. And I took my kids to see it. And on the way back, my oldest said something really insightful. She said, I liked it, but you can have too much realism in an animated movie. And I thought, well, that's a funny thing to say, but the more I thought about it, I know what she's saying. When they were cartoons, you could anthropomorphize them more thoroughly. How many of y'all know what the word anthropomorphize means? Okay, so I'll help you with it. I'm a teacher, and I've learned not to assume that people know what I'm talking about. Anthropomorphizing is when you take something that's not a person and you project person-like traits onto it, like we do in the animals in Lady and the Tramp. They speak language. They speak human language, and specifically American language, and maybe British. Like, all of our movies, everything always speaks English, even when they're aliens from another galaxy. They still speak English, which is very anthropomorphic of us, even of alien life forms. But they redid it in live action, and it didn't work as well, in my personal opinion, or my daughter's opinions, because the more real it looked as a lion, the more it seemed weird for the mouth to be moving and for English words to be coming out of it. And also, if you want to make it look like a real lion, you're going to lose a lot of the expressiveness in the face that you get when you have just a regular animated cartoon. Lady and the Tramp's going to be the same way. And it just kind of reminds you that the animals that we project our own personalities onto, they're not humans. But here's the thing. We're animals too. And do you ever wake up and just think about the fact that you're an animal? We say it in theory. We know that we're a part of the animal kingdom, but I have a hunch that most of us don't really think of ourselves as animals, because our entire history as a species is about trying to not be animals. We're animals that don't want to be animals, which is really weird. And there's the source of like 90% of our anxieties and problems right there. I'm convinced the reason why Buddhism works so well is because it's about teaching you to not care so much about all the things you're trying to make happen, because our entire existence is defined by trying to be something more than we already are. That's why we make gods, and I'm going to get back to that in just a second. But it's part of the essence of our nature as people to want to be something more than animals. And as a young evangelical, I used to poke fun at people who anthropomorphized their animals. They talked about their pets like they were their children. And we used to snicker at them, like, that's kind of dumb, or that's kind of sad. And then we would like morally judge them when they cared more about what happened to whales, than what happened to the unborn. And all of this is a part of a system that says humans have to be separate from the animal kingdom, because if they're not, a lot of the structures, the social structures we've created, start not making as much sense. Let me chase this rabbit trail just a second. I'm going to assume that most people here did not vote for Donald Trump. I'm just going to make a random guess. Now, some might have, and some did not. All right, so one of the things that I have to, as a teacher and as a parent, I have to analyze the behavior of adults. I actually get paid to do that, and I have to teach students, here's how you should act, and here's how you should not act. That's part of my job. And when the leader of the free world does things that are juvenile, that are vicious, that are mean, I have to try to explain to my students why that's not okay, just because a powerful person does it. But the more I tell them that, the more I realize that's a social construct. I still feel the way I feel. I think the way that Trump acts is terrible. And I'm really worried about the fact that there's so many people that like him. But if you think about it, he's just doing things that in the animal kingdom would be normal. Think about all the bad things that we say are evil in human behavior and put it into animals and see how you feel about it now. It changes it, doesn't it? Because the animal kingdom does things like they compete for resources. They kill their enemies or harm them. They steal things that aren't theirs. They are sexually deviant if you try to put a sexual norm on them, because the animal kingdom just does what it does. So then come over to people. We're animals, but we don't like to act like animals because we're trying to become something more. So one of the things we did as a species is we invented religion. Now here's the thing. Nobody wants to think that their God is made, but they're okay with noting that other people's gods are made. No matter what God you might believe in, you can look at somebody else's and go, well, that's just silly. That's obviously made up. But we could at least agree that some people's gods are made up. And the question is why? Why do we do this? I think if you took a whole bunch of human beings and put them on a deserted island like Lord of the Flies, just take small kids, throw them out there, and somehow they survive, they're going to end up coming up with their own religions. Because I think it's wired into who we are to ask big questions about why things are the way they are, to have emotional needs that we want to have met that somehow people are not enough sometimes, because we're all kind of faking it till we make it, as human beings. We're trying to become something more than we are, which is why we suck at it. We're trying, but every time we think society is advancing, it then takes 2 steps back, reminding us that, oh yeah, there's a lot of people out there that think this kind of behavior is fine, because it's rooted in who we are. It's an ancient wiring in us that we are trying to overcome, but it's not that easy. And so somewhere along the way, communities figured out that if they could create a story that's big enough to contain everybody else's little story inside of it, then it helps give structure to society. And there's a lot of different ways you can come up with that. You know, like over in the UK, I think that their sports teams are like a religion to them. Have you ever been there and seen how they care about football? Football, that's soccer, but they call it football. It's like religion and nationalism and sports all wrapped up into one. You know, it's tribalism. It's harsh, mean tribalism. At football games, soccer games, they get into brawls. People can die at these things. Someone told me that at some of the games in the UK, they have to leave a giant section of the stands empty so there's enough of a buffer that if one of them starts running across, they've got time to stop him because the people will die. That's how much they care about these things. It's almost like a war, but it's just a football game. Tribalism is so wired into who we are. Religion is one of those things that we came up with. It's like a kind of technology, if you will. It's a thing that we created that helps create order. And the question is, if we were to get rid of religion today, what would we do tomorrow? We would replace it with something similar. It might not have the God layer to it, but it might. And even people that get rid of God start still looking for something higher than themselves to either emulate or search for. When I was a fairly new atheist, one of the first things I realized is that, first of all, a lot of skeptics and atheists, they love Carl Sagan. Huge fans of Carl Sagan. And I get it. I understand why. He was a very deep thinker. And he asked a lot of deep questions about who we are and why we're here apart from religion. But he also wrote a novel about encountering extraterrestrial life. And he knew it was fiction. I mean, he was just imagining what it would be like if we ever encountered extraterrestrial life. Have you ever seen the movie Contact? Beautiful movie, by the way. I love it. And it addresses the question of belief very directly. By the way, I'm going to mention movies a lot. Is that okay? You might not have seen all of them, but I still think in movies, so forgive me. But in the movie Contact, there's the question of how people know what they know. And there was a religious person played by Matthew McConaughey, which is a real weird casting choice. Although he did get to say a really good line. He said, he was no longer a priest, but he said, you should think of me as a man of the cloth, but without the cloth. That was a well-placed line. But in that movie, we encounter extraterrestrial life and we have to decide what to do about it. And what you see is the way people react. And in the movie, as well as in the book, one of the things that happens is people begin to worship them. We don't even know who they are. They're from Vega, a star system we didn't think had any life at all. But now suddenly a whole religion of Vega worship comes up. Why? Because who was it? Was it Arthur Clarke that said that any sufficiently advanced technology would be indistinguishable from magic? Yeah, if you went back into the past and showed them a cell phone and tried to explain to them what it does, they would think, that's sorcery. We know that we don't know everything. And even when we get rid of a religion, we still start looking for someone that's ahead of us to help us forward. And we start looking for extraterrestrial life, intelligent life, because we know that we are not necessarily succeeding at what we're trying to do as a species. We're trying to become something more than we are, and we know we need help. We try to help each other, but we keep hoping, and we can't get rid of the hope that maybe there's something bigger and better than us that's going to help us pull us forward. We'll learn from them to get better. So I think it's fascinating that skeptics who throw away all religion still end up looking for extraterrestrial life, because I think both of those searches, the search for God and the search for alien life, are rooted in the same thing. It's a hope that we can get better. And the reason why we're looking for somebody bigger and better than us, it's just like when you're a little kid and you don't know what's going on, and you look for the tall people. You try to find one of the tall people that knows what's going on. And the ones that seem to know the most what's going on, those are the ones you want to be around. Which is why people love cool kids, because they seem like they know everything. They don't, it's just an act. But everybody loves them so much for it that it makes them feel better to be around somebody who's confident. Which is incidentally why I tend to say that certainty is the currency of fundamentalism. In fundamentalist churches, all you have to do is just be certain of yourself, and everybody will listen to you. You don't have to show your reasons why. You just have to be sure, because that's what we want. We want to believe like we know what we're doing and we're going in the right direction. And so I think, again, we get rid of gods, we still need something, and we fill it with something else. So I'm going to give three answers to the question of why we need gods, and I'm going to wrap it up, and then y'all can ask your questions. Okay, so number one, we are a curious species, and we want to know why things happen. We want to know why things are the way they are. And before we develop the ability to answer those questions well, we just make stuff up. That's just what we do. There was a time where we began to look up in the skies and say, okay, so that ball of fire, it goes from here to there, and the next morning it's back there again. So maybe it's like a chariot that's on fire, and there's an invisible man that rides the chariot every day. And when he gets to that end, he quickly runs back to the other side, and he comes up from that side again. And that's what it is. Of course, it's wrong. We're using our imagination, though. We're trying to explain how things are the way they are. Then we look up at the stars at night, and we're like, okay, so that looks like a shape. And maybe that's on purpose. Maybe that looks like a giant spoon because the gods are trying to tell us something. Or maybe it's not maybe it's an animal. What kind of animal is it? And every society comes up with their own idea of what those shapes are. And they're totally subjective. Do you know what that word means? Subjective, meaning that we made it up. We know that we made it up. But here's the thing. We could go stand on a different galaxy and look at those same stars, or a different solar system, look at the same stars, and they would look totally different from a different angle, wouldn't they? The shape wouldn't be there at all. The shape is only there because of where we're standing. In fact, I'm pretty sure the shape has changed over the course of human history, but we still can use the shapes, can't we? We can actually get from point A to point B using the shapes. And it doesn't matter that we made them up. We can still use them to find our way in the dark. I think that's the way religion is. I think that's the way a lot of our social constructs are. They may or may not be true, but the question is, can they still get us where we want to be? That's a more important question than what's real and what's not. Because my guess is no matter how close we think we get to figuring out what's real, we're wrong. We're just maybe less wrong than we were a year ago. But by the time we get to the end of our life, we're still wrong. Maybe about more things than we're right about. But we're trying. We keep reaching and we keep coming up with ideas that maybe this is the right answer, maybe this is the right answer. When we get rid of the influence of religion on mainstream culture, it gets replaced by something else. We used to talk a lot in the 80s about how God was being taken out of schools, because prayer was being taken out of schools, as if you could take a God out of a school. It's a small God. But there was a shift in society, in American life at least, in English-speaking life, that became less religious. England went through it earlier, and we're going through it, but we keep going through these cycles. Back when Darwin came along and gave us a different explanation for how things came to be, people were like, well, that does it. Religion's going to go away. Because one of the main questions was, where did we come from? And now we know we descended from primates. So now religion's going to be gone. And they began forecasting that religion would be gone from the planet by the end of the 19th century. Were they right? No. As a matter of fact, it came back to life stronger than ever. The fundamentalist movement during the 20s, the Scopes monkey trial, and ever since then, they've taken to the airwaves, they've taken to the internet. When I first deconverted from my faith, I heard people saying that because of the internet, religion's going to be gone in a generation because we have access to information. If you're a Mormon, you can go look up the history of the Mormon church and find out all the things they don't tell you. So the idea is this will get rid of religion. No, it won't. Churches know how to use the internet too. And so do conspiracy theorists, unfortunately. And so do people who intentionally try to misinform. So these things just keep resurging no matter what happens. You start watching movies in the 90s, and all of a sudden supernatural things start coming out of the woodwork. Like we got rid of the standard religions, but now it's witches and warlocks and goblins and people with superpowers and then superheroes, and now we got the Marvel movies. I think this is all a part of the same impulse. Captain America, he's just a genetically engineered human being. We're imagining what would it be like if we were bigger and better and stronger. And I think that's the same impulse that creates gods for us. It's because we're trying to imagine what would it be like if we had even more of everything we want, if we were more powerful, if we lived longer, all the things we wish we could do, extend our lives, have greater power, be smarter. We just create imaginary beings that have those. If it's not gods, then it's aliens. Now, I tend to think aliens might exist, or maybe they're so far away we'll never find them because the space is too much. I don't know. But the same hope for contact is there, and it's the same hope that makes people reach for God because we want somebody to pull us out of where we are to a higher place. So, number one, it's an attempt to explain where things came from. And more we're finding more quantitative answers for why things are the way they are. We can actually analyze. We now know the stars are balls of gas a long way away. We know the sun is actually not even what's turning, it's us. We have to devise instruments to even figure this out. Another thing that happens is we are, at our very core, social animals. And we are born needing everything to be done for us. I have my theories as to why this is. I think a long time ago when one group of primates started walking on their hind legs, They realized it would make their hands free to grab things. And whether they realized it or not, they were getting cleaner hands because of that. And it changed the internal, flora and fauna of their insides. They also discovered fire about that time. And while some of the primates, when they saw fire, they didn't understand it, they ran. There were others that were so curious. It tickled their brain to see something they didn't understand. Those primates moved towards the weird things instead of away from them. And they learned things that nobody else did. And they ended up having children, and their children had children, and their children had children. And now curiosity is like one of the key traits of human nature. Every time we see something that doesn't make sense, we go, that's fascinating. Even our sense of humor is rooted in discovering something we didn't expect. And it's the weirdest thing. When we see something we didn't expect, it's such a jolt of energy to our brain, we laugh. Isn't it weird that we laugh? It's just a weird concept. But I think it's because our brains are wired to reward us for novelty, for discovering things we don't understand. Once we see something we don't understand, now that's something new to learn, and now we're excited about it. That's human nature. I think that's just a part of who we are. But our brains kept getting bigger and bigger, even as we were walking on our hind legs, and females' pelvises started getting narrower and narrower, and the heads of the babies kept getting bigger and bigger, until eventually babies had to be born so fast, they didn't even finish cooking. Like, elephants gestate for what, like 2 years? People come out after 9 months unable to do anything. But if they waited any longer, they'd be too big because their heads are so big. So we have these babies that are useless when they're born. A horse is born and it can run by the end of the day. A baby, it'll be months before it can even walk, much less run. So take that kind of an animal and get into its psychology, and what you're going to discover is it comes into the world dependent, looking for somebody bigger than itself to give it everything it needs. And we grow up still feeling that. And even when the people that used to take care of us are gone, part of us still wants that. We still want somebody bigger than us and better than us that we know is going to take care of us. And if we don't find any, we'll make them up. Have you ever seen the movie Castaway? Great movie, Tom Hanks. He crashes on an island. Once again, it's a crashed island story. But he doesn't have anybody to talk to. So what does he do? He gets a volleyball. He finds a volleyball that washed up on the shore, and by accident, his bloody hand made a face-looking mark on the ball, so he starts talking to it. And the moment he starts talking to the ball, he gives it a name, because it's a Wilson brand ball, so he calls it Wilson. Tom Hanks says, he's married to Rita Wilson, one of the longest-lasting Hollywood couples ever. As soon as he read the script and saw the ball's name was Wilson, he's like, I'm sold. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this movie. And it's a fantastic movie. He had to create a friend so he wouldn't be alone. And he became so much happier, so much more able to thrive and think once he had somebody to talk to. And spoiler, I'm sorry if you haven't seen the movie, but there comes a point where he's separated from the volleyball. He loses it. And he's weeping. And did you cry? I cried. If you saw that movie, you cry when he loses the volleyball. And you know it's a volleyball, and he knows it's a volleyball. At one point in the movie, he's screaming at the ball. And at one point, he screams that it's just a ball. And that's part of what makes him so mad, is that he needs things from this ball that can't provide because it's just a volleyball. But I think it was a beautiful picture of the way we are. We will make up a friend if we don't have one. Did you ever have an imaginary friend? I did. And it's because we don't want to be alone. We are born into the world social, and we want someone to talk to. When we attach our lives to another person, through marriage or some other way, they learn our story, and they get to watch us as we grow. But those people don't always stay. Sometimes they go. And then somebody else comes in. And then you have to tell them the whole story again. And then sometimes they go. And then you have to tell the story again and again and again. You get better at telling the story because you get more efficient at filling in all the gaps. But the thing is, your story changes every time you tell it because you think slightly differently each time you tell the story. But it's really frustrating to not have that one person that's always there forever. Yet another reason we have gods. Because we want someone to always be there. So here's my final question, final point. I think it's also about reaching forward. It's also about meeting needs that we know that we have. And my question is, does it really matter whether it's real or not? Because even when we get rid of gods, we replace it with something kind of like gods. When we get rid of religion, we replace it with something like religion. Maybe we need to start asking, what are the key needs of human beings that this is meeting? And how can we meet them in ways that apply to as many people as possible? I think that's what Unitarianism is about. It's about asking questions about how human beings, what their needs are. They need to not feel alone. They need to feel that they can trust that things are going to work out okay in the end, even when we don't understand what's happening. They need to understand what's going on in the world. How did things get to be the way they are? And can they be changed? Where are they headed? What are we going to be like 1,000 years from now? Even movies about artificial intelligence are about trying to create something bigger and better than ourselves that we are sure is probably going to destroy us as soon as we make it. And in the movie Ex Machina, she actually says, I'm like a god now. The moment you made me, I was better than you, and now I'm like a god, and you're what I'm replacing. To each species, the one that replaces it might as well be a god, because it's a sufficiently advanced life form. So why do we have gods? That's the end of that talk. I just think that we need them for some reason, for lots of reasons. Now, that doesn't mean that I believe in any of the specific gods that everybody else does. I like to say, it's not that I disbelieve in all gods, just not yours. Whatever yours is, I've probably heard it and I don't buy it. I'm not saying there can't be any, because the thing is, if a sufficiently advanced life form contacts us, it could have all of the traits that we ordinarily ascribe to a god. So I don't really care anymore about the question. I just want to know, what are we going to do that we can agree on that will move us forward without destroying ourselves? And if a god is what it takes, last illustration, I had dinner a couple of weeks ago with a friend who is an atheist now himself. His wife is not. And his kids, though, were raised basically to be skeptical. But his 18-year-old son has been struggling with suicidal thoughts. And while he's never been religious, somebody invited him to church, and he found Jesus. And you know what? He's not having suicidal thoughts anymore. And you know what the dad said? He said, that's great. I don't care what he latched onto. I want my son to be with me. Because that's a more important question than whether or not we believe the same things about gods. And I can relate to that. I feel that way about everybody. I don't really care so much about whether or not they think the same way I do about big divine questions. But if something helps you thrive and be healthy, I'm going to do what I can to work with that. Now, if it starts being mad at you for everything, like whether or not you have dirty thoughts, or whether or not you just want things, I think that's dumb, and I'm going to try to talk you out of that. But the point is, I think we just need it. And some form or another of it we're going to have no matter what. All right, I'm done. Do we still have time for Q&A, or do we run out? I'm very sorry, by the way. The Google Maps took me 30 minutes south of town, and there's this wonderful dilapidated home with nothing in it that I thought was the Unitarian Church for a while. Also, isn't it Unitarian Universalist? Y'all have got it backwards. So when you type it into Google, it doesn't find it. Okay, what's your question? Thanks for tuning in to the Godless and Dixie podcast. Be sure to subscribe, and while you're at it, check out the blog itself at godlessanddixie.com. If you're helped by what you've heard and would like to help me keep doing what I'm doing, you can become a sponsor through visiting patreon.com/godlessanddixie.